The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
I find a lot of hilarity in miscommunication and the potential for miscommunication within complex systems of human interaction, and was always ready to do my part to further such miscommunications.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. The Sad Stories Told for Laughs series continues with Doug McKelvey. You may know Doug McKelvey as the author of Every Moment Holy, the much-loved collection of prayers and liturgies. He's also a prolific songwriter and screenwriter, and just a hilarious storyteller and a creator of situations that lead to great stories, as you will soon find out. Doug McKelvey, thank you for being my guest today on the Habit Podcast special Sad Stories Told for Laughs episode.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm always delighted to have a conversation with you, even if it's being recorded.
A lot of times these sad stories told for laughs, especially when we're talking to writers, they happen when the writer, the private person, finds himself or herself in a situation where he's having to be a public person, right? Book signing, reading, whatever.
Yeah.
You got any times when you ventured out into public and were faced with your own chagrin?
I think anytime I venture out into public, I feel like I'm at risk of that. Just because I tend to be very, very socially awkward and not pick up on social cues very well. So anytime I'm in a public space, I think, I don't know if I want to do this again.
Yeah.
It's easier. I mean, I actually don't mind too much being behind a podium and, reading a talk that I've written. I don't mind that part of it, but then just standing there and talking to person after person that I don't know is there's an aspect of it that I do enjoy, but there's also an aspect where I just feel like the whole time is like, okay, what am I supposed to do with my hands kind of thing? I just tend to be very self-conscious in any interaction, which, is not a specific funny story.
Mm-hmm.
And I apologize for that.
Yeah. So instead of trying to subtly lead you toward the story I want you to tell, I'm just going to tell you which story I want you to tell.
Okay.
There was a time when you were doing some sort of publicity thing, like podcast, some sort of event in support of your Subject with Objects book. And you decided to be clever and do a Night Vale thing.
Right. Yeah. So there's a bookstore in Nashville, in East Nashville, that specializes, I think all they sell are books by Nashville area authors. And during maybe the summer and fall months, they would do this series of having authors come and speak, and they would pair them with a music artist who would do a concert there as well. And this was shortly after Subjects with Objects had been released, and I hadn't tried to do much in relation to that book in terms of speaking anywhere, because it's not a book that you can easily do a reading from.
Right.
So I thought,
and just to clarify, this is a book. It's a book of paintings by Jonathan Richter that you wrote inscrutable captions for.
Right. So it was a fun, quirky kind of project that manages even today to sometimes sell one, maybe even two copies per quarter. So
is that right?
It almost pays for the fee on the checking account that we had set up for the for that collaborative project. But yeah, I had been listening to the Welcome to Night Vale podcast. This would have been several years ago, and just thought that was a very innovative and interesting kind of approach. So I thought I would do something like that, because there was a bit of that tone to the project, the Subjects with Objects project. And so I wrote out this talk and stood up in front of the crowd and started to give it. And people were not laughing. It obviously was not connecting, and people had no idea what I was trying to do. But I had nothing to fall back on. So I got a couple minutes into it, and I'm just, I know that I'm physically shrinking and withering. And I just tried to power through it, and it reached a point where I just couldn't any longer, because it was just too painful. And I just needed to go hide in the shadows. So I just ended it like right in the middle of the thing. Didn't even get to any sort of payoff. Because it didn't matter to the audience, because the payoff would, they weren't tracking with me to get to the payoff anyway.
Yeah.
So I threw it over to the artist, Jonathan Richter, to talk about, his approach to the paintings. But there was nowhere for me to go, because this was an outdoor thing. And so all I could do was kind of step back and actually move behind Jonathan, so that there was a physical barrier between me and the audience. And I kind of feel like there's this common theme across my life of awkward moments like that, where I set out to do something that in my mind I've worked it out. It's going to be, it's going to go smoothly. And then I just bail right in the middle of it because it becomes too much. It reminds me of being in college. There was a girl that there was this thing at the college I went to called Find Your Roommate a Date, which
Okay.
I think it was mostly a freshman thing that freshmen were supposed to do, where you would find your roommate a date and they would find you one, and you would do a double date kind of thing. And, very, very casual and lighthearted kind of thing. Like your whole wing would be doing this. So my photo that was in the freshman directory was probably like the best, most deceptive photo of me that was ever taken. I actually looked kind of cool. And probably like I was, 6'2" or something. It sort of had implied that in the photo because of forced perspective.
You put very small objects. You found a miniature horse and stood next to it.
And so, I got this call of this girl who's wanting to set me up with her roommate for Find Your Roommate a Date. Because she had just seen my photo in the directory and I guess had, higher expectations than she should have. And so we went out on that date. I think it was to a bowling alley, and there were probably, it was probably a group of 12 people. So a few months later, we hadn't really had any contact, but there was some event where I thought, I want a date for this. So I think I'll call that girl and, see if she wants to go. We'd had no contact in between. And so I actually write out the script of what I'm going to say on the phone when she answers. And so it's, I don't know, probably 8 p.m. And I call, the phone rings. I'm about to hang up. And then someone says, hello. And I was like, hey, can I talk to Linda? Yeah, this is her. Hey, Linda, this is Doug. And she's like, what? Wait, what? And it was obvious I had just woken her up. And it just went south so quickly that I just hung up the phone. And after I hung it up, I realized I already told her who I was.
It's like the worst crank call ever.
So I think there's this common thread of, putting myself in a position where I just can't deliver in the way I had envisioned I was going to in my communication. And then I freeze and I run.
Do you say this? Are you suggesting this happens a lot? Because that's not the impression I get just from interacting with you.
It has happened a number of times, I think. Yeah, it's a pattern. If I look back across my life, it's a pattern.
The idea of you hiding behind Jonathan Richter reminds me of a story you told me one time about some trouble you got into involving you were doing some radio DJing. Right,
in high school.
Yeah, and ran out of the room. Hid.
So I grew up in Longview, Texas, and one of my best friends, David, and I had made a pitch to the local top 40 radio station, which was the second most popular station there right after the big country station, that we would do a Christian rock radio show, like for an hour on Sunday afternoons. And for whatever reason, maybe in punishment for some secret sin that they had committed, they accepted, and they allowed us to do this. So it was the week before the show was going to launch, and they had 2 locations, one in Kilgore, one in Longview. and they were broadcasting at the time from the one in Longview one afternoon. So they said that we could come in and practice on the equipment at the main hub in Kilgore. So we're there, learning how to use their turntable systems and which switches to flip to turn the mic on and off and to fade, one turntable audio into the next one. And we can hear their live feed some of the time. So we're hearing the commercials they're playing. And, we were cutting up and lampooning the commercials that they were playing and hearing. And after a few minutes, one of the DJs who was at that station doing some production work, I think, in the back, he comes bursting into the control booth, and he says, "You guys need to leave right now. You've been going out live over the air. You flipped the switch that put you live, and everyone's been hearing you, making fun of the sponsors." And the general manager of the station is furious. And so this is a week before our show even is supposed to launch. And it was just this surreal horror. Dave and I, we grabbed our stuff real quick. We ran out to the car, just drove home in a stupor. I mean, we couldn't even talk to each other. We would just shake our heads and occasionally look at each other and just, there were no words. We drove to Dave's house. We, walked through the living room, didn't say anything to his parents, just went into his bedroom, closed the door, locked it, and both of us hid behind the headboard of his bed, between the wall and the headboard. That was how utterly shamed and humiliated and just aghast we were. And we couldn't process what had just happened. And we were certain that the whole venture was over, that we weren't even going to get to do this show now. But
that is the funniest thing to me. The thought of y'all hiding behind a headboard as if that's going to somehow help something.
It was just a childlike grasping for comfort of some sort, a safe place. But we did land a feature in the Longview paper a few days after that, and that pacified the station manager somewhat to get that kind of publicity, and so the show did happen.
Oh, it did. That wasn't the end of your career.
It was not.
Okay. You mentioned Christian rock and roll. Did you happen to be a Steve Taylor fan? That's what's called a leading question, Doug.
Yeah, I was a Steve Taylor fan from the first day his "I Want to Be a Clone" EP showed up at the New Life Bible bookstore.
Yeah,
in Longview, Texas, and I snapped that up. And I wore the print off of that cassette tape. I played it so much over the next year and a half or so, and I saw Steve perform a number of times. One of them was at the Cornerstone Festival in Illinois during the summer. And I was right up front at the center stage, this outdoor festival. And so I got some good photos of Steve as he was performing. I think that was the show where he jumped off the stage spontaneously and broke his leg or his foot.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So he finished the set hopping around on one foot.
Wow.
For the rest of it. But so maybe this is a sad story for Steve Taylor as well as for me. If we can.
It's about to get really sad for you. So proceed.
Well, so I wanted. I was kind of a Steve Taylor super fan, and I, wanted to reach out to one of my heroes and become friends and let him know that I was pretty zany too. So I wrote a letter to Steve Taylor, a gushing adolescent fan letter, and I took one of those photos of him, and I cut him out of the photo and cut this figure of Steve Taylor at the shoulders and elbows and hips and knees, and glued those to popsicle sticks, and then used brads and created this Steve Taylor puppet, as it were. And enclosed that in the letter.
That's zany
again,
stuff.
to let him, my letter was going to stand out for sure.
Yeah.
For on the zaniness index, it was going to be, 8.6 at least.
Yeah.
And
you two were two peas in a pod.
Yeah. And he just needed to know that.
Yeah.
And then there was no response. And months went by and years went by, and I forgot about it. And I graduated from college. I ended up moving to Nashville, became a songwriter, went to church with Steve Taylor, had various interactions with him, did some songwriting with some of his artists at Squint Records, and decades went by. And then my friend Nick, he was my college roommate, but he ended up becoming Steve Taylor's manager, proper management. And one day he told me, "Hey, so, back in the day when Steve was doing a lot of touring and making a lot of records, he was getting so much fan mail, he didn't have time to go through any of it, but he didn't throw it out. He just in his attic had all these big, bags of fan mail. And he said he just recently started going through those. And he told me he came across a fan letter from you." So this was it was a self-inflicted, spring-loaded humiliation, right? Set to detonate 30 years after the fact. Once I actually knew the guy, right? Yeah. And might have even achieved some modest level of respect in his eyes. And then that house of cards came tumbling down. And he was gracious enough never to mention it directly to me, I think because the content was probably just...
Yeah, but obviously he mentioned it to Nick, right?
Yes, he did mention it to Nick. So yeah, he saw the humor value in the humiliation of it.
Did Nick know? Nick knew there was a puppet in there?
Yes. I think that came up when Steve was telling him about it. So.
Oh man, that's such a Nashville story. Country comes to town, and
Yeah,
oh man,
I wrote some fan letters to other artists that I was a big fan of. So one of them was Terry Taylor, Daniel Amos.
Okay.
Super creative band, just brilliant songwriting. And again, I wrote a letter. I I think that one was particularly embarrassing because I had the radio show, and labels would send me like free albums and things. But
wait, let me slow you down for just a minute. You just told me a story about making a finger puppet for Steve Taylor, and now you're talking about a different story, saying now this one's really embarrassing.
Well, yeah.
I mean, my brain might explode.
So I write this long, like way too long, handwritten fan letter to Daniel Amos. But I have the gall within that context and the lack of social finesse that I'm asking them for free stuff at some point in it. And I'm sure it was baldly obvious to them, that the 4 pages of humor that preceded the request did not actually hide, the nature of the letter. And so then a few years later, I go to college, and one year I'm the concerts chairman for the university. Okay. And so I bring in a couple bands from Southern California that I was a fan of, and become friends with some of those guys. And so they invite me and my roommate Nick to come out to LA and hang out with them, so that next summer we go there for a couple of weeks. And they were friends with Terry Taylor, and it's kind of a close-knit bunch of a lot of the Southern California Christian New Wave sort of bands. And so we take a trip to the racetracks, and Terry joins us. And so it's like the first time I meet him in person. Mm-hmm. And like, I think we were sitting a couple seats apart, and so I meet him there, we shake hands, he hears my name, and then he just kind of stares at me. And it's like, I can see that there are these wheels turning in his head, that it's like, and he's like, you're familiar, your name sounds familiar for some reason. Oh no. And at that point I remember that letter that I had written, when I was in high school. And, I played it cool. Just like, no, I don't think we've ever met.
There's been some other Doug McKelvey from Longview, Texas.
But yeah, from his expression, I thought, okay, they probably really talked about that letter, and
your name was kind of a
made fun of it, and my name was dragged through the mud some there. And
did you learn?
And maybe he was just being gracious in not actually coming out and saying, "You are that man."
Do you still write fan letters?
No, I don't. I learned my lesson.
Yeah. I had just a couple of nights ago, met a young man who said, "Hey, I used to read your books when I was little, and I sent you a fan letter." And I thought, oh no, he's probably going to say you never, acknowledged it. But apparently I did write him back and drew a picture of an alligator for him. So
nice.
So I hate to brag, but unlike Steve Taylor, I read my letters and respond in a timely manner.
So a couple of days ago, I thought of an incident that might be funny for the humiliating aspect of it. That actually you were a part of part one of it. So you remember a few years ago, maybe 4 years ago, when several of the authors at Rabbit Room Press were invited to do some speaking things at this awards show for Christian fiction writing. I guess it's their big awards show. Yeah, and so all of us we're given different. Well, actually, at that point, they had me read a prayer for a liturgy for fiction writers from Every Moment Holy, which made sense, and it seemed like the things they had us doing kind of made sense in context at this award show. So, and we didn't get paid for it. At least I didn't.
I did. I went on vacation.
I thought maybe the Rabbit Room had been paid for it, and it kind of went through that, which was fine. The next year, they contacted me personally, and they said, "Hey, will you come and do, some readings at the award show?" And Rebecca Reynolds. I suggested that they have her come and because they needed kind of 2-part thing, and so they brought her into town, and so we did that, and I think it was might have been C.S. Lewis readings then or something, and they actually did pay that time. So then the next year, they invited me to come and speak again, and this time it was just me. It had gone from 6 or 7 Rabbit Room authors the first year to now it's just me. And so I do these readings, and then I start to realize when they introduce me, and they're just kind of this is Doug McKelvey. He's associated with Rabbit Room, and he's going to do these readings for us or whatever. And then interacting with the people, at the they seated Lisa and I, my wife and I, at one of the head tables with some of the main people who are there, and it started to dawn on me. They actually have no idea who I am, and they don't even know I'm an author. They think I'm this professional presenter, reader. And it was just so funny and they didn't pay me for that one, which was...
No, they didn't think you were professional, apparently.
Right. So it was just this bizarre, again, kind of a surreal thing of, I don't know why I'm here. Yeah. I don't know why they keep inviting me to do this, but somehow they've just gotten it into their heads that I'm the guy, I'm the professional reader. And I'm not that good at, I'm pretty average at just, reading reading from a script, some C.S. Lewis quotes, and while they have a slideshow going behind me or whatever.
I did more than one, author visit at a school where I'd show up and I'd say, "I'm here from the author visit." They're like, okay. It's like they didn't, somebody somewhere in the building knew that I was coming, but it certainly, they hadn't warned very many people that I was coming,
Yeah.
It's a little bit of that. So what am I doing here exactly?
Right. So I had decided I'm not going to do it this next year if they invite me. But I am going to ask them. Would I get paid this time? But then COVID happened, so there was no.
Well, maybe you'll get asked next year, and we can see how it goes. I had, let's see. I'm trying to think how this even worked out. There was somebody who I think they invited me to come speak. I'm sure you remember how this worked, because it seemed like you lorded it over me a little bit. They invited me to speak, then they uninvited me and invited you instead. You remember this?
Well, my experience of it was just that, someone contacted me and invited me to speak
point.
At this place. I didn't.
That's a good point.
Know
you
the
didn't realize that I'd
prehistory.
gotten uninvited. They told me something like it didn't work out, and the next thing I know, you're going out. You're going out there.
Well, it ended up just being an online conference and talk.
Oh, okay.
So you didn't miss a trip to LA.
I was picturing you putting on your sunglasses and going out to LA and probably hanging out with that Taylor person that you'd written a long letter to.
And actually the honorarium, because it was just online, only ended up being about a third of whatever they might have told you it was going to be. So,
Okay.
You didn't miss a lot financially either.
So, Doug, there's one more story I want you to tell that it's not exactly, in the vein of professional humiliations. It's more about you causing chagrin to other people. And that is about the time you found a professor's pictures in a trash can or something. The table is set.
Right. Yeah. Even before the internet was a thing and trolling was a term, apparently I had been trolling all my life, just because I find a lot of hilarity in miscommunication and the potential for miscommunication within complex systems of human interaction. And was always ready to do my part to further such miscommunications. So this one was just purely opportunistic. I was in college, and I think I was just exploring the labyrinth of hallways and mazes, a couple floors below ground in the library building at the university. And I think it was right outside where the yearbook staff was housed and where they did their work. And there was this big gray plastic trash can on wheels out in the hall, and it was full. And as I walked by, on the top, I saw these like contact sheets of photos of a particular professor who I didn't know. I mean, I think I recognized him and knew what department he was in. And they were, they weren't good photos. They were pretty awkward looking, and some of them were blurry. And so, but I fished those out of the trash because I just thought, okay, there's something to be done with these. Took them back to my room and confirmed, in the directory who that professor was, Dr. So-and-so. I'll just call him Dr. Lumry for the sake of having the name, because I don't remember now. So I hand wrote a note. I looked in the directory. I picked another professor at random from a completely different department. So let's say that's Dr. Atkins. And so I hand wrote this note that said, Dear Dr. Atkins, wondering if you could let me know which one of these photos you think is best of me. Signed Dr. Thomas Lumry. So I put it in an envelope, addressed it, put it in the inner university mail, and have ever since then been amused just by imagining what might have unfolded from that. Because, first you have, definitely we know that Dr. Atkins would have received this, would have opened it, and just would have so puzzled over why this other professor in a different department who, he would know who he was, but likely they weren't friends, they had probably shaken hands at some dinners and, that sort of thing. And he would just be mystified as to why in the world would Dr. Lumry want my opinion on this? But, he's asked me, I need to give him some kind of a response. So I imagine Dr. Atkins, just writing a straightforward response of Dr. Lumry here, I think this one is the best photo of you. And mailing that back to Dr. Lumry, who then out of the blue receives this letter from Dr. Atkins, who has taken it upon himself for no apparent reason to let Dr. Lumry know which of the photos of him Dr. Atkins thinks is best. So there's, I have no idea what actually transpired there, but I do, actually more often than you would think. I think about that incident and laugh at what might have happened. So.
Oh man, me too. I think about it every now and then. Well, Doug McKelvey, it's been a delight. Thank you for sharing your humiliations for the edification and amusement of the listeners to the Habit Podcast.
Anytime.
This podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. And all our podcasts are made possible by the generous support of our members. To learn more about us, visit rabbitroom.com. And to become a member, rabbitroom.com/donate. Special thanks as well to Taylor Linhart for letting us use her song Diamonds as the theme music for Season 3 of the Habit Podcast. You can learn more about Taylor and follow her work at taylorlinhart.com.
The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.